First, a provocation. Here it is. Michelangelo was not an artist.
What did you say?
I'll say it again. Michelangelo, the peerless Italian painter of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and the sculptor of the David and the Pietà, was not an artist.
What? What are you talking about?
Okay, second, a question for you. Here it is. Does it ever happen that you have an overwhelming desire to, let's say, write a short story or a screenplay, but you don't know what to write? Know what I mean? Like you feel like an artist without a muse, meaning you feel like you have the ability to create something worthwhile, but you get stuck on what to do with that ability.
So what?
What's my point? It's this. It's that I think that we, as a society, have developed a toxic relationship with the word artist.
And remember, only 1 out of 100 of you will ever make a living as an artist.
After all, these days, who isn't an artist? Musicians are artists, actors are artists, writers are artists, and of course, artists are artists. But how is this possible? How can this one word, artist, describe a group of people who are not only incredibly diverse, but whose work is also incredibly diverse? And seriously, and I mean very, very seriously, how can this sell for $6.2 million while countless manuscripts and screenplays that took years and years to write never find a publisher or a producer? How did this happen? How do we get to a place where art, that is the creation and consumption of work that is largely subjective, become conflated with what we might call creative labor, that is labor that carries an objective market value?
I'm a writer, you monsters! I create for a living!
Well, the truth is, I don't know.
Honestly, your guess is as good as mine.
But I think we can find some clues if we take a very brief look at the history of Hollywood movies. Okay, here it is in like 43 seconds. Bear with me. As you probably know, Hollywood was founded on what's called the studio system, a kind of producer-driven assembly line that cranked out movies for the country's voracious audiences.
This is a business where the buyer gets nothing for his money but a memory. What he bought still belongs to the man who sold it. That's the real magic of the movies, and don't let anybody tell you different.
In this system, a producer had a slate of films and would assign X writer, director, and actor to each one. The films would then go into production in as orderly a fashion as possible.
Why, you dirty, gum-chewing, hypocritical sneak.
The important thing here is that the producer in the studio and not the director were seen as the creative visionaries behind these films. Why? Because a director was not considered an artist, but rather a craftsperson. An artisan, we might say. Someone with directorial expertise.
You've got to talk into the mic.
Well, I can't make love to a bush!
Someone able to execute the vision of their employer. But what happened?
Something else.
Well, in the late 1950s, a disgruntled group of Parisian film critics, including Jean-Luc Godard and François Truffaut, began to argue that the films of, say, Howard Hawks were distinct because they were directed by Howard Hawks. They argued that a film is ultimately the creative personal expression of its director.
Every time you turn around, expect to see me.
A concept that came to be known as the Auteur Theory. Out of this, the French New Wave was born, a cinematic movement that spread around the world and that forever changed how films and filmmakers are conceptualized. Because what the Auteur Theory did was elevate the director from craftsperson.
David, tell them to go home. We're shutting down for a few weeks.
What?
Well, don't just stand there. Tell them.
Everybody go home until further notice.
To visionary, from artisan to artist. And I think it can be argued that this catalyzed, or at least paralleled, a similar transformation among writers and screenwriters. Instead of craftspeople for hire, writers and screenwriters came to be thought of, and very importantly, came to think of themselves not as artisans, but as artists.
The book, Russell? I'm a novelist. I'm never going to finish the book.
Now, let's be abundantly clear. Some of the greatest movies ever made have been director-driven, personal, creative expressions. There's zero doubt about that. But, in my view, one very important detail is conveniently lost in this conversation. And by conveniently, I mean exploited for profit. More on this in the next video about the dreamer economy. But what gets lost in this conversation is that the argument made by the filmmakers of the French New Wave was not that a director isn't first and foremost an artisan. Quite the opposite. Because in fact, they idolized the craftsmanship of the directors of Hollywood's studio system. They weren't arguing that a director is an artist and not an artisan. Rather, they were arguing that by being dedicated artisans, these directors had managed to create important art. By now you see the point I'm making when I say that Michelangelo was not an artist, right? I mean, it's not like he was sitting around with nothing to do when he decided to sculpt a 17-foot tall statue of David. And it's not like he was hit with a stroke of genius and took it upon himself to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Of course not. Rather, he was a meticulously trained sculptor and painter, and the David and the Sistine Chapel and the Pietà were all hard-earned commissions. They were cold-blooded exchanges of labor for money. So when I say that Michelangelo was not an artist, I say it with the deepest admiration and the deepest respect. Did he create art? Of course he did. He created some of the most exquisite art ever made. But was he an artist? Well, here we get down to it. What I'd like to think is that while others may have called him an artist, he would have rejected this and insisted that he was, humbly and proudly, an artisan. What about you? Are you an artist or are you an artisan? I think most of us have been taught to identify as artists.
I believe you are blushing, Mr. Big Artiste. I can't imagine Monsieur Monet blushing.
He does landscapes.
If you work with words, here's a challenge. Even if you don't agree with me, put the word artist to the side for a second and try on the word artisan. See how it fits. See how it feels. Because if there's one takeaway here, it's that by being conditioned to identify as an artist, that is by being conditioned to identify with the subjectively valued result of one's labor, rather than as an artisan, that is with the objectively valued skills necessary for one's labor, many of us fall victim to excruciating feelings of inferiority and insecurity, as well as to profiteering forces that take advantage of us.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
And actually, I think you can push this one step further and speculate that most successful artists, quote unquote, whether writers, filmmakers, or musicians, do not think of themselves as artists, but as artisans. Why? Again, because even when it comes to the realm of the subjective, success is most frequently accompanied by skills that are not subjective, but objective. So, to sum up, if you sometimes feel like an artist without a muse, that is, if you sometimes feel like you have the ability and the desire to create, but you don't have clarity on or the confidence in what you should create, maybe it's because you're an artisan. There is, at least for me, enormous freedom and purpose in this, because the focus is no longer on the subjective value of me as a person, but on the objective skills I can always try to cultivate, apply, and exchange for compensation. Okay, thanks for watching, and as always, take anything that's helpful and disregard the rest.